Hi, this is Colin from the History Pilgrim. I hope you've been enjoying my videos and I'd be interested to hear your comments. Be sure to like and share with a friend. I have an interesting story for Halloween season. In West Pittston, Pennsylvania, one family home became a battleground between the living and something far darker, before the events that would make their home a national tragedy. The Smurl family was in many ways a typical American household. Jack and Janet Smurl, along with their children, were a typical working-class family. Like most families, they were looking for stability and comfort. They purchased their new home, a modest suburban house, in hopes that it would be a peaceful place to raise their kids. However, the home they envisioned was soon shattered. Their story would end up being a haunting of such extreme severity that even the Pope was terrified to get involved. Almost as soon as the Smurls moved in, strange occurrences began. For some context, the house they purchased was not a new construction. The house was constructed decades earlier. It was an ordinary residential structure by nearly all means. Several families had lived there before them, each leaving behind the traces of domestic life in the form of wear and tear. This age, while lending to the house's character, created an environment where subtle noises and structural quirks could be the explanation for any paranormal encounters. The house, a two-story structure, featured multiple bedrooms, a kitchen, a dining area, and a basement. When the haunting began, the incidents were minor enough to be brushed off as normal disturbances common in new houses. The incidents, which were at first strange noises, footsteps echoing in empty hallways, doors rattling, and occasionally unexplained thuds from the basement, were subtle at first, but the events grew more unsettling, hinting at a malevolent presence. As the days passed, the incidents grew more persistent. The Smurls began to notice a foul odor permeating the house, a scent of rot and decay, which would appear and then disappear. Doors would slam violently with force, objects would move randomly, and cold spots would appear in areas which otherwise felt normal. The family's early attempts to rationalize these occurrences as drafts, mechanical issues, or the imagination of stressed children became increasingly difficult to justify. The first incidents were often centered in the basement and the hallways, places the family spent little time anyways. The events were subtle at first, but an unseen force began to target the family. Their beds would shake violently in the dead of night, and strange knocking sounds would echo just outside their children's bedrooms. Their kids began panicking nightly at these events. The incidents truly became horrid when physical violence and intimidation began. Members of the family reported unseen forces slapping, choking, and shaking them while they slept. Furniture would topple over, doors slammed shut on their own, and family pets were tormented. One of the most terrifying aspects was the personalized nature of the attacks. The forces seemed to focus on individual family members, particularly Janet Smurl, while leaving her physically bruised and emotionally shattered. Janet Smurl recalled seeing tall humanoid shapes in the dead of night. These figures would appear in the hallway and sometimes at the foot of her bed. Doors slammed violently in the presence of these entities, and objects would fly across the room. What began as unsettling noises and smells became a persistent and aggressive invasion of the household itself. The family began sleeping in shifts, or even leaving the house entirely for extended periods of time, unable to take the constant harassment. The situation got so bad that local priests were contacted to bless the house. Yet the disturbances persisted. Witnesses described the atmosphere in the house as oppressive, almost sentient in its malice. Every night brought a new round of fresh torment to the Smurls. One might assume that leaving an extremely haunted house might provide a break from the ceaseless torment for the Smurl family. But even a camping trip proved no sanctuary. Reports from the family detailed them hearing strange groans and whispers outside, and an invisible force clawing at the tent. By the early 1980s, the disturbances had attracted national media attention. The Smurls eventually turned to the ultimate spiritual authority, the Vatican. While the Pope did not personally conduct the exorcism, the haunting received the Catholic Church's formal recognition and oversight. Senior clergy sent experienced exorcists to cleanse the house. Television crews arrived in the house, with cameras trained on the walls and staircases. Interviews with the family detailed events so bizarre they seemed to straddle the line between nightmare and farce. The home began to attract paranormal experts and skeptics. Letters began to arrive from strangers claiming to have insight or cures. There comes a moment when some misfortunes cross the ordinary limits of a haunting and become sheer torment by supernatural forces. By the time the Smurl haunting reached its absolute climax, the house itself became a wildly unpredictable antagonist. Furniture would randomly be thrown across the room, sometimes narrowly missing a family member's head by inches, as if an unseen force had grown bored of merely spooking them and was now bullying them for sheer sport. Doors began to slam shut with such force that windows shattered, and footsteps echoed in rooms at all hours of the day. The auditory terrors had reached its absolute peak. Groans, hisses, whispers, and even full screams could no longer be brushed off. Sometimes the sounds were mocking, other times they were distorted in a pitch, creating a sensation that the sounds were coming from inside the walls themselves. Perhaps the cruelest aspect was psychological. The family could no longer find solace even outside of their house. Fear had seeped into every aspect of domestic life, making sleep, meals, and even watching TV unbearable, due to the fear that the torment would resume. The human dimension, the media attention, and the constant scrutiny added a layer of horror all of its own. Family life was disrupted not only by the phenomenon themselves, but by the pressure of public curiosity and skepticism. Friends and neighbors began to whisper, some supportive, some nosy, but all intrusive. The haunting was no longer just in the home, it was now in the world outside as well. Every horror, no matter how persistent, eventually reaches a point where the intensity wanes. For the Smurl family, such a moment arrived after years of relentless assaults. Doors still creaked and shadows still appeared, but the invisible forces that once dominated every corner of the house seemed to have lost its focus and furiosity. The story, however, did not end with mere relief. In 1991, a made-for-TV movie adaptation titled The Haunted presented the event to nationwide audiences. As the years have gone on, so many questions have been raised. One has to wonder if it is possible some aspects of the haunting were staged by the Smurls themselves. Perhaps objects were intentionally displaced, noises amplified, or accounts fabricated for attention. However, such allegations do not diminish the impact of the story. Why the house was haunted is a question with no clear answer. Perhaps a tragedy occurred years earlier on the site. Others suggest a haunting which was spiritual in nature, tied to their children, or possibly because of the land itself being cursed. In the end, the Smurl haunting remains both a cautionary tale and a mystery. The house, once a center of unrelenting chaos and dread, eventually quieted. And the TV adaptation, whether for better or worse, transformed the horror into a Hollywood spectacle. I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to stay tuned in the month of October for more spooky videos. Sincerely, the History Pilgrim.